Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and I am honored to have back with us today Bryan Fischer. He is the Director of Issues Analysis for Government and Public Policy at American Family Association. We've had Bryan on before, and I really appreciate this man's work and his passion for what he does. And today we're talking about something that I think you're going to find to be pretty impacting, and that is that the American Psychiatric Association now classifies pedophilia, yes, pedophilia, as a sexual orientation. What does this mean? What does this mean, and how will it impact us, and especially organizations, faith organizations across the country? Bryan, nice to have you with us. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Perry, and it's always good to be with you. Thank you for having me back on. And I just want to begin. You'll notice if you're watching on Skype that I've got my Stanford University lanyard around my neck here. You know, and actually, when I was ready to come on air, I took it off because I thought, well, that'll be a distraction. I said no. So it's back on. I just want to extend a word of kind of sympathy and condolences to all of my friends in Oregon.
Well, you know, I have to tell you that even our sports announcer said that it would be Oregon by 3, and it ended up being Stanford by 6, so he was a loser by 9.
Well, I'm telling you, I watched that whole game stem to stern, and I got really worried there in the fourth quarter, you know, when Oregon staged the comeback and returned block punt. So that's a quality team, and we were nervous right till the final whistle. We were lucky to escape with that one.
Well, I have to tell you, I knew we were in trouble when in the first quarter, we got the ball to the end zone and couldn't get it in twice. And I thought, uh-oh, this is going to be a hard night. And it was. Well, congratulations to you. You can gloat in it all you want.
Well, thank you. Well, and you've turned our attention to what I think is a critically important topic, Perry. And this is just kind of an amazing thing when you think about it. To give a quick snapshot of what goes on here, the American Psychiatric Association, they produce what's called the Diagnostic Manual, the DSM for short, and they produce this thing every 10 years. And this is treated by those that are in the psychiatric profession as virtually the Bible of psychiatric disorders and mental and emotional health. So it's very authoritative. It's consulted by psychotherapists and psychiatrists and psychologists all over the United States. Yeah. And they produce an updated version of this thing once every 10 years. So 10 years ago was the last time a new edition was produced. This is their updated version. This is the DSM-5. This is the 5th iteration of this diagnostic manual. And in the print version of the DSM-5, the latest one that they spent 10 years revising, it identifies pedophilia not as a mental or sexual disorder, but as simply a sexual orientation. That's what's in the print version of the manual. Now, when we here at the AFA, when we found out about this, we issued a statement, we issued a press release as soon as we found out about it, that the APA is now reclassifying pedophilia as a sexual orientation. Well, the APA immediately began to scramble and go into retreat mode, and they said, no, that's just a typo. What we meant to say is it's simply a sexual interest. Well, even sexual interest is different than a sexual disorder. Interest is very neutral. You can be interested in a lot of things. You can be interested in collecting butterflies. You can be interested in golf. It's a very neutral term, where the term disorder indicates, look, there's something fundamentally wrong here with the thinking pattern and behavior pattern. Now, they have pledged that they are, in the next print version of the DSM-5, that they're going to correct that. They're going to change it from orientation to sexual interest. That's still not adequate for the reasons that I just mentioned. But I have to say, Perry, I just do not think this is accidental. If you spend 10 years working on something, they know that this section of the DSM is the most controversial part. A lot of care, every decision, all the wording there, very deliberate. I just don't think it stretches credulity to think that this was just a typo. It was just an accident. And you can see a progression. Perhaps we can get to that, but you can see a progression in what the APA has done with pedophilia, where they have gradually relaxed the psychiatric standards on this particular condition. And now I believe they're on the verge. I think they did, and they would have left it there if we hadn't called them out on it. Now they're trying to scramble back because they realize the American people are not ready to accept pedophilia as something that is a normal alternative to heterosexuality. So we called them out on it. They're beginning to backpedal, but we're not satisfied that they're going far enough.
Well, if they take the word or the classification disorder away from pedophilia, then it certainly opens the door. Isn't this somewhat, Bryan, a quantum leap? I really thought what would happen with all of the attention towards same-sex marriages that the next move would be polygamy, not pedophilia. So they've jumped over into a category maybe to get the shock and awe over and then gradually integrate it in. Because if they don't create it or classify it as a disorder, then you and I both know where that's going.
Well, that's exactly right. And I do believe that this was their agenda here, was to do this by subterfuge, to slip this in the DSM. I mean, that thing is a huge thing. I mean, that is one of the thickest books you're ever going to see. It's hundreds of pages. And I think they were hoping they were going to slip this thing in here. Well, it's actually thousands of pages. Slip this thing in here, hope nobody will notice. And then if it surfaces in a year or two, they could always say, hell, we did that a long time ago. That's old news. And then it's in there because it's in the print version. And the reality is, you know, Perry, it's still in the print versions. I mean, psychiatrists, mental health professionals, they get updated versions when they come out. This is what's on their shelves right now. You know, and you're right. I think they just try to jump right past polygamy, right past polyamory, and get right to calling pedophilia something that's innocent. I mean, their argument now is going to be that people are born this way. This is very, very dangerous because this is actually, this defense, pedophiles have actually used this in court cases, one in Canada and one in Florida. They haven't been successful with it, but they've actually used in court the defense that this is my sexual orientation. This is the way I was born. There isn't anything I can do about it. You really can't blame me for this because this is the way that I was born. So if this gets the official sanction of the American Psychiatric Association, then that is going to strengthen their case in court. They can say, well, this is not just my personal opinion. This is now the leading psychiatric authority in the country is saying the same thing. So it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous.
All right. In some ways, they're winning the war because you and I are now discussing this. And the more that it's publicly discussed and the shock of it is minimized, then it becomes the area of discussion publicly and socially and politically and everything else. And before you know it, it's common.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly the strategy that homosexual activists pursued with homosexuality. I mean, they outlined their strategy, and one of their strategies was just talk about it. Talk about homosexuality all the time. Mm-hmm. Don't let people think about the behavior itself, because that'll turn people off. But just talk about it all the time. Get it in ordinary conversations. Use that term over and over again because it desensitizes people to it. If they hear it often enough, then like you're saying, they begin to think of it as something, well, that's just a normal part of conversation. And then it's not long before they're starting thinking, well, that's a normal behavior. That's a normal sexual orientation. So it's very deliberate on their part to kind of desensitize the American public to this issue.
Well, part of that desensitization is children. Children are going to hear this topic, hear this discussion, and say, what is it? And then they're going to be told. What do we do with that?
Yeah. Well, and you know, when you start thinking about the implication for school settings and so forth, if this becomes accepted, you know, we have this Employment Non-Discrimination Act bill that was voted on by the Senate this week. It's being sent over to the House now. And that would prohibit any kind of discrimination against anyone based on sexual orientation. Yeah. Well, you can begin to see where this is going to go, Perry, because if this gets classified as a sexual orientation, then businesses, schools, daycare centers would not be allowed to discriminate against somebody who even admits that they're a pedophile. They can say, look, I've never acted on this desire, but this is the kind of sexual interest that I have. And a daycare center could not refuse to hire that person on that basis. So you can begin to see some of the incredible risks this is going to represent toward children all across the United States.
If the APA does take the word disorder away from pedophilia, what's left of their credibility?
Well, I think the reality is, you know, they capitulated on homosexuality in 1973. Up until 1973, homosexuality was listed in the DSM as a disorder, as a mental and sexual disorder. There was something fundamentally disordered about those that were attracted to homosexual behavior. And so it was considered something that was not normal. It was something that required treatment. It required therapy. And that, yet because of political pressure, not even because mental health professionals agreed with them, most mental health professionals, a year after that change was made, about 68% of mental health professionals said this is a mistake. We still believe that these people are disordered. They need help. They need corrective therapy. So it was a purely political move. It was political pressure. It was done not for scientific reasons, but for political reasons. And now we're seeing that same kind of dynamic with the APA. And I think your point's a good one. You know, if the APA capitulates on this, then I don't see why anybody should give them any credibility whatsoever.
All right, I got to take a break here, Bryan. When I come back, I want to get onto a little bit what happened yesterday in the Senate. As you know, you just mentioned it. They did pass that discrimination bill. Goes over to the House. I don't know if the average American or even faith-based organization understands what this could mean if this thing sees the light of day. So we'll be right back. Bryan Fischer is with us today, and Director of Issues Analysis for Government Public Policy there at American Family Association. And let me encourage you to support this organization. AFA.net is their website. And boy, what a resourceful organization they are. Bryan, we'll be right back. All right, we're back with really one of our colleagues in this industry. Bryan Fischer is with us today. He hosts his own show, Focal Point. Focus Today, Focal Point. We have a theme working here. I don't necessarily promote other guys, but I promote this guy a lot. He does a great job, and he's on the American Family Radio Network, and let me encourage you to check it out. We should probably put your show on theDove and just get it over with, Bryan.
Well, that's kind of you. Appreciate that.
No, I really value and appreciate what you do. All right, we're talking about the fact that the American Psychiatric Association is now seriously considering classifying pedophilia as an orientation and not a disorder. And they blew the whistle on it, AFA did, and now they're considering it what to be just an interest, right?
Yeah, they have removed the word disorder, even in their correction. They're no longer classifying it as a sexual disorder. It is now a sexual interest. And again, that's a very neutral term, nothing pejorative about interest, because you can be interested in a lot of innocent things. So we don't even believe that that's an acceptable alternative. And one other point I'll mention, Perry, before we move on, I'm looking at a piece here published by the Harvard Medical School back in 2010. It's a 2-page piece, and 3 times in here they describe pedophilia as a sexual orientation. So this is Harvard Medical School. This is 2010. This is why I think the APA is going to go this direction. They're going to go the full-blown sexual orientation approach, because Harvard Medical School has already given them permission to do it.
What does this mean to sex education, Bryan? If it sees the light of day, if disorder is taken away from this classification, and even if it's interest and doesn't really get classified as an orientation, eventually it would head that way. But if it's just considered an interest, does it show up in the textbooks?
Well, it would have to. It would be forced in there by homosexual activists and by pedophilia activists. You know, and right now we already know that sex education in as early as kindergarten is being done to desensitize elementary school children to homosexuality. They're being taught that it's perfectly normal to have 2 moms instead of a mom and a dad, or to have 2 dads instead of a mom and a dad. Again, that's a way of normalizing behavior that we believe is non-normative sexual behavior. The same thing will have to happen with pedophilia, or these textbook publishers or these schools would be sued for not telling the truth about sexual orientation. So it's very, very dangerous.
Wow. All right. Yesterday, the Senate did pass the discrimination bill, and it heads now to the House. And it basically says that you cannot discriminate in hiring on somebody's sexual orientation. And there was no provision in there, from what I can see so far, that would exclude faith-based organizations. I mean, this is the camel's nose under the tent.
Well, you know, this may be the whole camel inside the tent. You know, and your point is well taken, Perry. There is some kind of very flimsy religious exemption in there, but it applies only to churches and to institutions that are actually run and under the authority of a church. So an organization like the American Family Association, for instance, or like theDove would not have any protection whatsoever under this legislation. And it prohibits any kind of discrimination, any kind of You can't include sexual orientation or gender identity disorder. That's still a disorder, according to the American Psychiatric Association. A man that wants to cross-dress, who thinks he's trapped inside a woman's body, that's still a disorder, according to the DSM. But you would not be allowed, even though you were a Christian business owner. It's a private business. It's not a religious, it's not a ministry thing. You just are a Christian businessman. You have a business that you want to run according to Christian principles, according to Judeo-Christian values. And if you did not want to hire a cross-dresser, if you advertised, for instance, that you had a position you wanted to fill, a cashier at a Christian bookstore, let's say, and a cross-dresser showed up to apply for that job, you could not turn him down because he was a cross-dresser, or you would face a lawsuit that could put you completely out of business. So the way this thing shreds the First Amendment, it strips all values-driven businessmen in America of their religious liberty protections, of their freedom of speech. They would not even be able to say that they think there's something non-normative about homosexuality or cross-dressing. Even if they said that, they could be subject to a lawsuit. Their freedom of press would go away. They couldn't even write a letter to the editor or publish anything in their personnel policy that would indicate this is an important issue for them in the organization. So it would expose every values-driven businessman in the country to a career and business-ending lawsuit. It's a horrible piece of legislation.
Well, I'm sad to say that one of Oregon's senators, Jeff Merkley, is one of the champions of this bill that was in the White House yesterday with the president over this, trying to broker some kind of a compromise, even with Republicans, to get it through the Senate. And apparently some Republicans did vote for it. Now it goes to the House. You have any feel what Boehner may do with this thing?
Well, there were 10 Republicans yesterday that voted for this thing, Perry, which is a great disappointment because it's contrary to the platform that the Republican Party has adopted as its official position. And I was also very disappointed that a lot of our conservative champions did not speak out against this thing. Ted Cruz did not say a word about this thing. Rand Paul did not say a word about this thing. Mike Lee from Utah did not say a word about this thing. Marco Rubio, all of them were AWOL on this issue, despite the fact that there are some very profound constitutional issues that are involved here. Now, Speaker Boehner has said that he's opposed to this thing, and his reason is that it's going to just spawn a host of lawsuits. And that's right. It's not the worst of the problems as far as we're concerned, but it's definitely a reality. And that's a good reason to be against it. We have enough lawsuits. We're litigious enough as a society. Yeah. We don't need to provide any more excuses for that kind of thing to happen. So Speaker Boehner is concerned about the impact on the business climate and the freedom of people to build the businesses the way they want to build them and according to their values. It's a valid concern. So he said he's opposed to it. And I'm not sure that I've heard him say yet, Perry, that he's not going to bring this to the floor. He has the capacity to keep this thing from even coming to the floor of the House. And that's what we hope he will do, is just not let this thing see the light of day. Let's kill this thing before it gets a chance to breathe again.
What are you telling your audience to do about it?
Well, we sent an action alert out yesterday encouraging people, and we give them a one-button click where they can send an email to Speaker Boehner and to their member of the House of Representatives opposing the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, opposing ENDA. So folks in your listening audience, Perry, could go to afa.net. In the upper right-hand part of our homepage, there's a button they can click on for action alerts. They can download this one click. They can send a letter to Speaker Boehner and to their representative. The software will even identify your representative. So it's one letter. It's already pre-written. You can put your own title in it and send it off and make your voice heard. And this is very, very important. We're concerned about it here at AFA because there's no protection in this legislation for an organization like the American Family Association. And we think that it's not, in fact, it's already happening where gay activist groups will actually send somebody into a pro-family organization to apply for a job with the intent that that person will be denied the job, and then they can sue them. It's already happened to ExxonMobil. No reason why it wouldn't happen to KDove or happen to the American Family Association.
It's so amazing, Brian. 1 to 3%, depending on the polls you see, of our population is changing the entire culture over these issues, these sexual orientation issues. It's just amazing that this small group has changed everything in this country. I mean, look what Governor Brown has done in California with some of his legislation. If a kid just feels like he's going to want to be a girl today, he can go into the female bathroom. I mean, how crazy is that?
Well, and they've made it illegal in California if you have a teenager who is struggling with unwanted same-sex attractions. He doesn't want to indulge in those attractions. He wants to deal with that. He wants to get past that. That's now against the law in California to give that teenager any kind of help. A parent cannot seek that kind of help for a teenager. So, last thing we need to do is make this whole problem with sexual behavior worse and sexual values worse by passing the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. That'll just compound everybody's problems.
Wow. All right. Well, what do you see coming at us next, Bryan? You're kind of a hawk on this. What's some of your other concerns out there?
Well, I think this ENDA thing is a pretty big thing. We need to deal with this. We need to do everything in our power to stop this thing, to keep it from getting any life. And one thing that people don't realize about this, let's say a Christian employer is okay with hiring homosexuals, and we're not saying there ought to be a law that prohibits people from hiring anybody they want. But if you had employees in a workplace, in a work environment, who simply said something that was critical of the normalization of homosexual behavior, then a gay employee, based on this bill, could take the employer into court because you have allowed a hostile work environment to be created under your control. I can't work there. It's hostile to my identity. And so you could be sued. So it's an extremely dangerous problem. Just to go back to that ExxonMobil thing, just to illustrate that very quickly, ExxonMobil is one of the few Fortune 500 companies that does not have special protections on the basis of sexual orientation in their personnel policies. Their shareholders voted 81-19 last spring. We don't want to go that route. Now, they've become the target of homosexual activist groups. There's a group called Freedom to Work. It's a gay activist group. This summer, they actually sent 2 resumes. They're fictitious resumes. There's no real person behind these resumes, so it was a scam that they were playing on ExxonMobil. Candidate A, applicant A, very accomplished, high education, a lot of achievements, and was also an admitted lesbian, an out lesbian. Applicant B did not have as stellar a resume, but apparently was, according to the resume, was a heterosexual. They submitted these applications to ExxonMobil. Candidate B, the one who was a heterosexual, got a call back from ExxonMobil. Applicant A, with a stellar resume, did not. And ExxonMobil has been taken to court because they wouldn't follow up with somebody who didn't even exist. So that just shows you the kind of examples of the kind of legal subterfuge, the legal attacks now that every pro-family group and every values-driven group is going to be exposed to. So this is, this is a huge issue.
Wow.
And I think obviously people are talking about Obamacare. That's an issue that's a long way from being resolved. I think there's still going to be a push to try to grant amnesty.
Yeah.
We're personally opposed to that because we believe it rewards law breaking and it weakens the fabric of our culture. They're going to try to push that thing through. So those are a couple of issues that we need to keep our eyes on. There's a lot of legal activity in states to try to get courts to overturn state marriage amendments. That's very, very dangerous. So we got to keep an eye on that.
Well, Bryan, you're an inspiration and delight. Thank you, my friend, for your hard work. Keep up the good work, and check out his program, Focal Point, on the AFA Radio Network, and go to afa.net. There is a resource for you. Click on all kinds of things there. A lot of resources there available to you, and support them as well. Thanks, my friend. Look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you, Perry. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
God bless. All right, we'll be right back.